Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending where in the world you are joining us from today. It's great to have you here. Thank you for coming together to celebrate a decade of data. So most of you will know that this year has been a very special year for the RDA as we celebrate the RDA's 10th birthday. And to celebrate and commemorate this important milestone with our member community, the RDA Secretariat has organised a series of different events and activities throughout the course of this year. And some of those events were the Community Cross-fertilisation Workshops. So we thought, what better way to end the year with a fun, very informal Community Cross-fertilisation Carousel. So we'll take you through a whistle-stop tour of the 8 different workshops that took place this year. So we also had this webinar earlier on today. The first webinar was at 6 UTC, and obviously this is the final webinar right now. So before we begin, I'd like to just introduce myself. So some of you might not know me. My name's Connie Clare, and I'm the Community Development Manager at the Research Data Alliance Foundation. And I've had the real honour and privilege of working with this wonderful, dynamic and vibrant community at the RDA, which I know that you all know very well, on the Community Cross-fertilisation Workshops. But I can't take full credit for that, so I just want to acknowledge Catherine Barker, who is based in Western Australia. Catherine is actually a former colleague of mine. She was affiliated with the ARDC, the Australian Research Data Commons, working for the Research Data Alliance, and Catherine actually ran a few of these events in her time zone. I'd also like to give a shout out to Irina Hope, who is on the call with us. Irina is the Global Events Manager at the RDA, and Irina's helped me put together and organise this event today, and she's helping with the Zoom logistics and also the optional speed networking that we have. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with Zoom and how it works, but please do mute yourself if you're not speaking, just to avoid any interference with the speakers. The slides are available in the chat, so Irina will post them for you if you want to look at them afterwards or reuse them. And the slides and the recording will also be published next week on the RDA web platform and will be promoted among the community. So all you really need to do as participants today is sit back, relax, and enjoy the showcase. So what have we got planned for you for the next hour to an hour and a half? The first hour, we're going to have a webinar where we've got some wonderful speakers and leads of the workshops today to present overviews of these cross-fertilisation workshops. And then if you want to stick around for the final half hour, we've got what we call RDA Roulette, and I'll explain a bit more about what that is at the end of the webinar. So I mentioned earlier that this has been a very special year for the Research Data Alliance as we celebrate its 10th anniversary. So the Secretariat put together 10 thematic months to celebrate 10 years of the RDA. So from February to November, each month was dedicated to a different research data related theme of interest. And we invited the global community, so not just RDA members, to suggest or propose events and co-organise events with the Secretariat throughout the course of this year. And we ended up with more than 50 different data-related events. So I think that's a really good reflection of how motivated and dedicated the community is. The idea of this year was to reflect on the past, present and future of the RDA, to reinforce the important mission, vision and guiding principles, to recognise you all as community members, but also partners and funders, and to celebrate the RDA successes with also the wider research community. And I've linked the event schedule for this year at the bottom of this slide, but you'll see when you look at that, we had various different webinars, also workshops, as well as these community cross-fertilisation workshops. A community member actually ran a series of Ask Me Anything sessions. We had various different podcast series. I know Rory McNeil is one of the speakers today, and he actually ran a podcast series. And we also had a few different blogs that were authored by RDA community members. So a very diverse and rich programme to celebrate this year. Obviously, we don't have time to go through all of those different events in one webinar, so we are actually publishing a highlights reel summary document next month. So this will be an online interactive brochure where you should be able to click through links and see the slides, read the articles and also watch the recordings. So I hope that that will be a very useful document and something nice at the end of the year to reflect back on. So now we get on to the Community Cross-fertilisation Workshops, and I appreciate that some of you here might not have been able to attend or participate in those. The idea of these was that these were thematic, virtual 1.5-hour workshops that were aligned with the RDA's 10th anniversary schedule that you can see here from February to November on this slide. So each of these months, we actually ran a workshop that aligned with the schedule, and the idea was to provide a space for the community to exchange knowledge, best practices and initiatives, and these were open to not just RDA members, but also the global research data community. I think these workshops also presented a very unique opportunity for RDA groups, interest groups, working groups, and the community of practice that are interested in similar topics and have a similar focus to connect with one another, learn about what each group is doing, brainstorm challenges, solutions, and initiatives. And then these solutions were distilled down into more concrete actions for the RDA community to take forward in the future. And we hope that some of these actions will also be considered when we come to implement the strategic plan in January next year. So I want to take this moment just to say a huge thank you to the speakers that have put together these wonderful slides today and that will give you these 5-minute lightning talks about the different workshops. So we have Maggie from Sweden, who will give us an overview of fair data software and hardware. Anne from France, who will talk about the health and medical data workshop. We have Rory McNeil from Edinburgh in the UK, who will talk about persistent identifiers. And this was a workshop that was run in collaboration with the Australian Research Data Commons as part of Metadata and Technical Infrastructure Month in May. We have Valeria calling in from Italy, who will give us an overview of agricultural and environmental data. Emma is actually not with us because she's in Australia, so she did the first webinar, but I will actually step in and try to give an overview of the workshop on research evaluation. Beth from Ireland will talk about disciplinary data. Anthony from the US will talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 17, Partnerships for the Future. And then last but not least, Magdalena from Poland will give us an overview of the workshop on research data management support and education. So each of these workshops actually culminated in a 2 to 3 page summary document that is published on our website and also in Zenodo. So you can see what these look like here, and they present an overview of the challenges, solutions, initiatives, and actions for the RDA community. So we have these 8 workshop summaries, and this actually involved 40 different RDA community members that served as workshop leads that were organising and presenting some of the information. And they represented 35 RDA groups. And collectively, we welcomed more than 230 global participants and together identified more than 160 challenges, 100 solutions, and these were distilled down into 45 actions that the RDA community can consider taking forward into the future. So I think that's a really wonderful achievement, and the community should be proud of that. And although this isn't possibly an accurate representation of the value of these documents, but as a proxy, already these documents have been viewed more than 2,600 times and downloaded more than 1,000 times. And although they all need maintaining and updating in the future, I do hope that they will continue to be useful to the community going forward. So on that note, I am going to stop and hand over to Maggie, who will give you an overview of the first workshop. Thanks, Maggie.
Yeah, thank you very much, Connie. I hope you can hear me okay. So I'm Maggie Hellström. I come talk to you today from Lund, Sweden, where I work at the university and at the data center for greenhouse gas and environmental data. So that's how I got into the business of RDA. So in this particular community workshop, dealing with the groups associated with doing things with the FAIR principles, we got together 9 different working groups and interest groups of the RDA from quite different viewpoints and quite different backgrounds, so to speak. So it was a very interesting and very productive workshop, I think, and I think it made us realize that why haven't we done this kind of meetings before? So let's hope that we can continue in some format with these cross-community discussions. So FAIR, of course, stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And since these 15 FAIR principles were sort of put down on paper around 2016, they have really become a buzzword, and loads of people are talking about the FAIR principles, especially in connection with open science, open data, etc. And they have been very successful in kickstarting really discussion on how to set up best practices to really support. I think interoperability is the most difficult part of FAIR when it comes to data and metadata. And a lot of advances have been made there already, although we are far, far, far from being really fair, even in that field. But it also raised questions about can we apply these principles to other kinds of research resources, research outputs. And in point there are really things like research software, research hardware, but also other things like physical samples, people, procedures, whatever. And it was found, and not only in our workshop, but also in other discussions, that no, you cannot apply the principles as they are worded for data and metadata to these other categories. And it's not just these different categories of resources that need different approaches to FAIR, also across different research subdisciplines, disciplines in different walks of academia and also research in industry. You cannot just take these things at face value and try to apply them. You have to create adaptations. You have to adapt to the circumstances. So that was really, I think, one of the main challenges that we also identified in our workshop report. But then there are many other challenges on the road to increasing fairness, not the least that you really need technical infrastructure and also theoretical infrastructure to be in place. Everything from good catalogs, repositories to consistent metadata standards, especially for different disciplines. And that is still a lot of work to do there. And then a final challenge is that there are currently really not enough incentives for anyone in the research data landscape to spend a lot of time on adopting FAIR principles in their activities. So how can we address these things? Well, if I go the solutions, so to speak, in the opposite order here, long-term funding for data stewards and other support staff is absolutely essential. We need much more training of everyone who's going to be using this, not only data producers, but also data users. We need to invest in the whole world in a global sense, and certainly not just in the global north, but also the global south, in easy to access, low cost, but effective infrastructure and tools. And we need to continue the work that I alluded to in the beginning to really find good definitions of how to achieve FAIR for different types of objects, and also develop metrics that make sense. And in the RDA, yes, so how can we support this? Well, to keep bringing together our different FAIR-related groups and not only meet at plenaries and things like that, but also try to have maybe at least one of these types of workshops annually, so that we can bring the whole wide community together and maybe discuss specific questions. But we can also use the RDA membership because we reach so many thousands of different people. So we can increase outreach on these questions so that we reach people really out in the academia about these questions, and also engage with external initiatives outside of the RDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Perfectly timed as well. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. I'm Anne Cambon-Thompson. I'm a medical doctor in France. I'm working in Toulouse, in CNRS and the university and the National Institute of Health. So I'm also have been one of the co-chairs of the COVID-19 working group, and that was with this casquette that I participated in the RDA for Health and Medical Data Cross-fertilisation Workshop in April. We were 4 different groups. So the COVID-19, which actually is several groups on different aspects of these epidemics data sharing, but also 3 interest groups on health data, privacy implication of research data sets, and the 4th interest group was sensitive data. So they were all concerned with, at least partly, with this medical data. We had a very nice and interesting conversations, and we identified a number of challenges, which were actually dealing with data access, data quality, harmonization and linkage, ethics, and social and cultural barriers. So I have selected some of them for this slide. So the challenge I would like to underline here was ensuring efficient, equitable, ethical, and secure data access and sharing practices to mitigate global health crisis. And the COVID-19 group, of course, had a whole experience on that, and that was happily shared, I think, with the others. The second challenge among the data quality, harmonization, and linkage ones is developing global data and metadata standards across different health and medical domains. And that is critical. And a third one I would like to underline among the social and cultural barriers is the lack of trust in health and medical data sharing workflows and systems. So these challenges and others that I don't have time to get into detail here went on discussing solutions. So 3 groups of solutions, 3 categories were proposed and discussed. One is around raising awareness, training, and education. And this is dealing with definitions, and that's quite important, generating guidelines, existing guidelines, also the minimum data fields required, data management plans, that's not original, but very important here too, and how to get ethical approval. And also we propose to have workshops among different stakeholders, because this is key for going across the different health and medical domains. Second kind of solution is around privacy preservation, one of the main challenge there. And there are 2 aspects there. One is dealing with data anonymization and the tools to do that. So we propose to have a survey on these different tools that exist to disseminate or generate specific guidelines on this aspect of anonymization, and also to use trusted third-party entities for not anonymized but pseudonymized data. And after these privacy preservation solutions, we went on to technical infrastructure solutions and tools, systems, and services for distributed curation of data sets that enable different levels of authorization. And that was a key element for this health and medical data. So with these different actions and at least solutions, we came discussing what to do in RDA and in the community. And the first thing that came out of the conversation was that sharing first-hand experience of this RDA COVID-19 working group was a sort of priority. And we proposed to create a toolkit that could reflect on lessons learned and steps necessary to produce guidelines and best practices in urgency, timely data sharing. There is a whole experience of this group there, and it really can be shared with the community more largely. Second thing was to create a directory of health and medical data initiatives. There exist a lot, but they are not really always known, and it's not easy to find them. So through this, mapping and making an inventory of various tools, resources, systems, services, organizations, and relevant communities was really something where we thought that the RDA community could be at the same time the actor and the beneficiary. So that with this, I will close. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for that. So over to you now, Rory.
Thanks, Connie. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know, I'm Rory McNeil from ResearchPace. We provide a tool for managing experimental and sample research data. So PIDs, certainly PIDs, it seemed to be the case at both Gothenburg and possibly even more so in Salzburg, that PIDs were on everybody's lip. Everybody was talking about PIDs. So it's a topic which seems to be of very widespread interest. And the kind of focus of the cross-fertilisation workshop and also other activities that went on subsequent to the workshop are it was actually stimulated by two different, there were a number of groups, RDA groups working with PIDs, and two of them, one is called the National Strategy Group, National PID Strategy Group, which is looking at kind of a top-down perspective. And the other, of which I'm a co-chair, is called Working with PIDs and Tools, which is more of a bottom-up perspective, which looks at how do you actually implement a PID deployment and solution at an institutional level, at a group level, at a researcher level, and trying to bring the two together. And I think Daniel Bangert had a really nice metaphor for thinking about these two groups and the roles they play. He said, if you think of the National PID Strategies Group, they're actually developing the roadmap, a real roadmap for real roads, if you will, and the working with PIDs and tools, those are the people that are providing the cars. Anyway, so the challenges that we looked at and discussed were addressing some of again technical barriers. For example, differentiating between tools and instruments in the context of PID creation and use, and in particular enhancing and enabling tool interoperability, i.e. interoperability of PIDs, as PIDs are used in tools in different stages of the research lifecycle, like repositories, data management plans, and electronic lab notebooks. Secondly, another big challenge is the lack of a central information base about PIDs. So I think everybody has had this experience. You try to find out something about PIDs, and you go to Google, and there's hundreds of different options, but they're all a bit siloed and they're all a bit specific, relating to a specific type of PID or a specific type of PID provider, and it's impossible really to get an overall perspective. And then secondly, there are multiple governance bodies which are involved with the development of PID policy as well as PID delivery. But there is no one body, and so and also certainly for the working with PIDs and tools, I think it was also evident in some of the discussions in Salzburg that the people who are left with actually implementing PID deliverance are often left out of the discussion. So people like data stewards at institutions, who are the ones who actually have to figure out how to make it work. People like developers of tools like ourselves. So to try to bring these groups more into the policy discussion as well. So we looked at a number of solutions, and as an obvious one following on my last point was that representatives of research institutions and research tools developers should also be involved in the policy discussion. We talked about creating a PID community of practice to encourage neutral interaction and discussion within the global practitioners community, whereas currently most of the discussion tends to be understandably kind of from the perspective of particular bodies, particular organizations. And the holy grail, which I think is more aspirational than anything that can be realized in the short term, but which is still good to have as an aspiration. The objective would be to normalize PID workflows so that they become an integral part of research supporting tools and services, whereas now we're still trying to figure out how to fit them in. And we thought of a couple of actions for the RDA. Seems like since there's so much interest in PIDs already, there's so much discussion. There were interest and working groups around PIDs. So the RDA is an ideal forum for trying to implement these solutions and to continue these discussions. So a couple of things we thought of specifically were creation of an RDA interest group that focuses on information exchange about PIDs, coming back to the earlier point I made about the lack of any central information resource, possibly we could get some RDA Tiger support for that. And the second thing is possibly this group and some of the other groups. In fact, we're actually doing this with working with PIDs and tools already, is to gather use cases on PID applications, because it's use cases which everyone finds most meaningful and most accessible. And then to make these use cases, again, available in easy to discover location, to assist in the understanding of the global picture of activity around PIDs. Thank you.
Thanks, Rory. Valeria.
Yes, thank you, Connie. I'm Valeria Pesce. I work at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the IGAD community, the community on improving global agricultural data. We had this cross-fertilisation workshop together with another interest group, the Global Water Information Interest Group. And these are more or less, I tried to cherry pick some of the challenges and solutions because there were many, especially challenges, but these were the ones that were more, let's say, common among all the participants in the two interest groups. The first one is, of course, a challenge let's say, related to diversity and heterogeneity. We, in the IGAD community, we work on agriculture, which is actually a very broad discipline. So we have sub-disciplines, we have different data types, different formats. There are no recognized common repositories where to exchange the data and information. So there is this big issue of really not knowing how to connect the data across, for instance, the value chain, because agriculture, of course, is the whole value chain from production to consumption. And there's a big issue there. Then there is an institutional and financial issue for all of us. Not only, of course, funding, but especially the lack of synergy. We don't work enough together. So we know that there is a need to work more together with the other institutions. And we felt that there is a need also to map what is happening in order also to optimize funding. Another big challenge for this discipline is data governance and ethics, as in many other disciplines, but we have to consider, besides the normal issues of ownership, attribution, democratization, we have issues, of course, with data coming from different stakeholders, and in particular, data coming from farmers and indigenous people, and the sensitivities there. In terms of solutions, we've been talking for some time about the idea of agreeing at least on what are the main data types that we have to address. So for instance, creating a typology, understanding which types we have to deal with, and crosswalks among them. And there is an idea of thinking of starting to think about standards for description of certain data sets. In this case, we are thinking of working on training data sets as the first case. Another solution that's come up in the discussions is, of course, we all want to have more cross-institutional collaboration. We want to gain more support from funding agencies, but we need also to map what is there, what everybody is doing, what the different institutions are doing. And then we need to address the third challenge, which is data governance and ethics. We want to work more with all the groups of stakeholders that have, let's say, a say in the management of data, and set up some voluntary ethical guidelines altogether. And from here come the actions, the ideas for action for the RDA community. We've been discussing ideas about new working groups. The first one that's really coming, I think this one will happen. It's about agricultural data ethics. We've had already a preliminary meeting with a member from the ethical and social aspects of data interest group, and we want to also contact the sensitive data interest group. And together we want to create a working group on agricultural data ethics as a, let's say, first case on how to implement recommendations and maybe a code of conduct for the different stakeholders in agriculture. Other ideas for working groups is one during the cross-fertilisation workshop, and an idea was to create a working group on the impact of climate change on water and agriculture. And this was together with the water information interest group. And there is an idea also to create a working group which is still across, it should be across different interest groups on the standards for the description of training data sets. There was demand from many members around training, raising awareness, and also perhaps certification on best practices on how to do proper archiving and creating proper repositories, etc. And in general, the idea for us is to collaborate more with other groups, and also to have more representation from the global south, which in our discipline is very important, because I come from FAO, but other members of the community come from different international organizations that work with the global south, and we really feel the need to involve more the people from the global south.
Thank you, Valeria. And I think that's also the case for many different RDA groups as well. I'm going to now move over to research evaluation. And as I mentioned, Emma can't be with us during this call at the moment, so I'm going to try to recap and talk to Emma's slides here. So the Research Evaluation Community Cross-fertilisation Workshop actually comprised 3 different groups. So this was the Evaluation of Research Interest Group, for which Emma is a co-chair, also the Sharing Rewards and Credit Interest Group, and the Data Policy, Standardisation and Implementation Interest Group. So I'm going to talk first of all about the challenges. So you can see the first one is about research culture and recognition. So this one relates to the fact that the culture of research does not currently support, recognise or reward the diversity of research contributions. Making data fair and sharing data is not adequately incentivised. In fact, sometimes it can be actively prohibited. And evaluation, in terms of this workshop, should be based on quality, productivity and impact. However, not all evaluation tools and mechanisms support that. The second challenge is about non-traditional research outputs and discipline specificity. So the workshop participants identified the challenge of evaluation of research needs to evolve to actually recognise the diversity of different research outputs. So not just talking about data, but software and other digital outputs. There's also a lack of policy tools, guidelines, training, funding and incentives that enable non-traditional outputs to be adequately and appropriately assessed and rewarded. And this includes the idea that we need to acknowledge that there's not just a one-size-fits-all approach. Many disciplines actually have very different needs. And the third challenge you can see on the slide is about alignment with open science. So we all appreciate that open science in practice is quite laborious, it's time consuming, it's burdensome for researchers, and it also includes financial barriers. So that was raised during the workshop. And there's a need to align open science policies and evaluation across organisations and countries. So now moving over to the solutions, the first one is continued advocacy for data sharing. So in the culture and recognition space, the continued advocacy of the RDA community and other communities for data sharing is absolutely critical. So this includes setting examples and precedents of best practice and lobbying to influence top-down as well as grassroots bottom-up development and action. The second solution that was identified is about RDA community collaboration. So this is about it's about outreach and including the presence of RDA groups at relevant events, such as, for example, the Euroscience Open Forum, and leveraging the diversity and expertise that we have in this RDA community to identify issues, gaps, and solutions for transforming research evaluation. And finally, the third solution is survey and audit of existing evaluation frameworks. So to establish evidence-based solutions, success and failure indicators are needed. So ideas that came from the workshop include an audit of existing frameworks and identifying, determining the extent to which they can include open science and open data and principles, and a study to understand the relationship between open science and research integrity. And then finally, moving on to the actions for the RDA community. The first one is about sharing success and failure stories and identifying funding to develop a register of examples. And I think that this is something that the evaluation of research interest group is actually doing, and they've applied recently for RDA Tiger support services to establish a working group. The second action for the RDA community speaks for itself here. So I think the call was to have an RDA plenary session on research evaluation. Obviously, it's a hot topic. It's been discussed in various lightning talks already so far, and probably warrants the captive audience that we can get together at the plenaries. And then the third action is about memorandums of understanding or agreements with relevant programs and initiatives internationally. So I'll move on now to the next speaker, which is Beth.
Thanks very much, Connie. I'm here to talk about RDA's engagement with disciplines. My name is Beth Kazook, and I'm the project manager for research data at the Digital Repository of Ireland. Full disclosure, I am not currently a chair of a disciplinary group or any group, I think, at the moment in RDA, but I was invited to co-host the disciplinary data session with Catherine Barker in order to share work that I've been doing on behalf of RDA in the EOSC Future project. This is a European-funded research project to explore how the European Open Science Cloud can better support it's a much bigger project than just looking at disciplinary data, but my task was looking at how it can support disciplinary communities, specifically those communities that aren't currently very well resourced or represented by services in EOSC. Some of you might have seen a survey that went out to the RDA community last winter that was asking about the global awareness of EOSC, and I just wanted to flag that that was kind of the start of the research that went into this. It also, in that survey, we asked about tools and services that were used by different thematic communities, and those went into informational sheets that can now be found on the RDA website under the tab RDA for Disciplines. There's a few communities that have been identified and they have information sheets there. So that was part of research that went into this task, along with interviews and focus groups. I leaned very heavily on the RDA community and on a group of grant-funded RDA/EOSC Future domain ambassadors for their expertise about the open science challenges and solutions that different disciplinary communities faced. So the first little bit of this meeting on engagement with disciplines focused on kind of the outcomes and challenges and solutions that I teased out of that work. And then we had a conversation with 3 RDA EOSC Future Domain Ambassador grantees who agreed to be a part of the session, and 3 chairs from disciplinary groups within the RDA. So we had representatives from the Life Sciences Data Interest Group, the Linguistics Interest Group, and the Biodiversity Data Integration Interest Group, all talking about challenges and solutions that they perceived within their domains. So my challenges here are kind of there's a lot more than what are here, but these are the broad categories that they fell under. First is figuring out where to start in disciplines that are not homogeneous, that are heterogeneous, that have a lot of different work within the discipline itself, and then figuring out the messages that need to be tailored for different stakeholders within those disciplines, subdomains for the different types of data outputs that these disciplines might produce. That it isn't just as easy as saying, well, we have advice now for the humanities, so they're done. There's a lot of individual one-on-one work that really needs to be done in order to properly engage all aspects of the work that's being done in the disciplines. There are also barriers to reusing materials developed for the domains if they are particular to the services available in one country and not in another country. So lack of global access to tools makes it difficult to obtain community consensus within a discipline. We saw this even within EOSC, where a lot of services and tools are actually open to the public, and you don't even have to be in Europe in order to access them. But there are definitely some services and tools that are geographically limited, and they're not even necessarily open to everyone in the EU. There's also a need for conversations around changing funding and evaluation. So I might sound like I'm just repeating what others have already said in other slides, but clearly this is a need. changing them as motivators, changing the evaluation methods so that it motivates participation in open science and encourages more wide sharing. Connie mentioned financial barriers, and I think it actually maybe was mentioned in an earlier slide as well, which was a significant part of this conversation. So turning to solutions, how do we deal with these problems? This is a little bit self-serving, but it's networks like RDA that emerge as being really important. On a small scale, with the RDA EOSC Future Domain Ambassadors, we saw that just bringing a small group together to be able to network and share across their disciplines really helped to facilitate better communication, better encouragement, better facilitation of the stuff that they were working on. That networking is really important. Sorry, just losing track of what I was going to say there. Connecting to international communities is important, not just for recognition either, but also for recognition, because recognition is important. I wanted to mention that the word ambassador meant a lot to the RDA EOSC Future Domain Ambassadors because it opened doors. And participating in communities like RDA can help to open doors and start conversations that might not have otherwise happened. Advocating for discipline-specific benefits within new reward systems is going to be really important. So again, if we're talking about changing the funding and evaluation process, we want to change the benefits so that they are reflective of the needs of different disciplines. We want to continue focusing on local outcomes as well, testing and tailoring outputs and recommendations. So doing what RDA does best, operating as a ground-up organization that is taking outputs and adapting them to unique situations so that we get a real variety of advice and a variety of examples of how open science can be done. So what are some actions for the RDA community? One of the key takeaways is that cross-community and cross-disciplinary conversations like the one that we're having here today, in which we had it a few hours ago this morning, are really important. That there needs to be opportunities to share across the network so that we don't get siloed in the work that we're doing, trying to solve solutions for very particular problems without realizing that those solutions could be applied in very different situations. So one of the suggestions that was raised in the meeting was that we revive something called the Disciplinary Collaboration Frameworks IG, which I hadn't heard of before, and I guess is not a functioning working group or interest group at this moment. But I would also like to put a pitch here for the creation of a domain ambassadors interest group. We want to take the learning opportunity that came out of the RDA EOSC Future Domain Ambassadors and a previous domain ambassador program that was also funded through European funding, RDA for EOSC Domain Ambassadors, and turn that into an interest group that provides this cross-disciplinary collaboration on a smaller scale. We want to maintain the RDA for Disciplines web pages that were started by the domain ambassadors and which provide a really good entry point for people coming to RDA and are curious about what work is being done that may have relevance to their discipline, like where do they start? So if you are actually doing work that might be relevant to a particular discipline that is named already on one of those RDA for Disciplines pages, please reach out to us about naming your interest group there so that it becomes more visible to those who might be landing on the RDA webpage for the first time. We also want to ensure disciplinary representation in the RDA Evaluation of Research interest group, which is newly formed. And that is it for me, Connie.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you. Okay, over to Anthony.
Hey, hello, everybody. So I'm here representing the RDA for the SDG interest group. I'd also like to just give a shout out and recognize my excellent colleagues, Ingvild Odegaard, Devika Madali, and Lindsay Barbieri, as well as recognize the superb leadership and experts that were involved and convened for this cross-fertilization event, particularly Norman Mukasa from the Data for Development interest group, Stephanie Heathers from the Services for Crisis Situations, the Data Systems Tools and Services for Crisis Situations Working Group, as well as Natalie Myers and Francis Crawley from the Artificial Intelligence and Data Visualization Visitation Working Group. It was really a superb opportunity to bring all of us together. So thank you to Connie and others for convening this. We discussed a lot of challenges surrounding the SDGs, both on the technical data and policy and kind of social side. So starting with the underlying challenges, the SDGs themselves are very broad in scope, and many of the overarching goals overlap or correlated with one another, and the underlying indicators and targets are very broad and lack some clarity in how best to implement them and operationalize them. So it framed this need of how do we advance to get more of those underlying indicators to that tier 1 level, wherein we have clear conceptualization of what those indicators are, how best to develop international standards and methodologies for collecting and analyzing data to monitor the underlying indicators and frame the goals and targets in a well-conceived and agreed upon consensus, and continue to advance to get more indicators to that tier 1 level. As well as how do we have real world and real-time data collection and capacity across all of the important stakeholders that are collecting and analyzing this data, and how do we get access to all the important stakeholders, from the national statistical offices to representation of groups that are most at risk and most vulnerable, and how do we make certain that all of those people are at the table together and underlying and conceptualizing the underlying indicators. There are also really important issues surrounding international policy and ethics. We need to, as mentioned, we need to ensure we have reliable real-time data for driving decision-making and driving policy, and making certain we have data that appropriately frames the gaps in international development, as well as make certain that we have ethical governance and accountability that represents and respects, and aligns with the CARE principles, and includes representation of the groups that are most at risk and most vulnerable here. It framed a real imbalance in the people that are collecting and analyzing the data versus the people that are being monitored and are most at risk within development situations, particularly in crisis situations. So how do we make certain that we have clear and appropriate and ethical international governance frameworks that respect the consent and ethics of people that are most vulnerable in these places? And that drove and framed the need for further not only policy, but partnership and representation of stakeholders across the global South, to make certain that we're appropriately in bringing these people all to the table and bringing experts to the table. The overarching kind of actions that we framed and discussed is to raise awareness across the RDA and working groups and interest groups and partners. So to both kind of tag underlying working groups and interest groups to where they most appropriately align with the SDGs, and to incentivize and a call to action today for all of you to participate and provide your information within ONTO SDG, which is a graph style knowledge management framework wherein we can appropriately tag both the RDA interest groups, working groups, and associated outputs, recommendations, and digital assets to map them to underlying targets, indicators, and the goals more broadly, so that we can have a clear landscape of what are the recommendations, policies, standards, and resources that can most appropriately map and support the underlying data management, education, and development for each of the underlying goals and indicators. And I think the most appropriately and most importantly, we wanted to just broadcast and disseminate where RDA can be of support to UN stakeholders and other stakeholders within the policy and development space. So we would like to publish something within the Data Science and Open Science Journal, as well as just produce more outputs and produce more communication packages that can frame where RDA can be most appropriately of support to the stakeholders that are involved in the SDGs. And also continue to encourage and build partnerships with members from the Global South, both within RDA working groups and interest groups. So ensuring that we're having real engagement and real representation and real inclusion of our partners within the Global South, but also ensuring that we are developing education resources and knowledge sharing across all of these partners that are often left out of the table, and making certain that we're including them. So we one thing that was kind of a noted action item was to build advocacy and ambassadors that could represent a particular SDG target or goal, and mark and denote those ambassadors and bring them all together. So that would essentially be on a volunteer basis. But how do we mark ambassadors for particular SDGs, and then also build more resources to share knowledge and information and resources across our partners. So I guess just in summary, encourage you to participate in the ONTO SDG and think about where your own work aligns with the SDGs. Think if you would like to be an ambassador or advocate, or who you think might be involved, who might be appropriate there, and continue to think about how best to be involved here. And thank you all for your time and all of your excellent work here.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for the overview. Okay, and so finally on to you, Magdalena. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Hello, everybody. I'm Magdalena from Gdańsk University of Technology from Poland. And today I have great pleasure to talk to you about our cross-fertilization workshop, which is based on the research data management support and education. So I represent 6 great RDA interesting groups, which are all connected somehow to the trainings, education, data stewardships. But from the previous slides, I think that like everything is overlapping, and education and training is really, really important, and it's a part of almost, or maybe of all RDA groups. So we have a very busy discussion, and I picked with Hugh, which presented this morning. We picked few some challenges, solutions, and actions. So first of all, and it's not surprise, a lack of funding and human resources for RDM practices and trainings and other activities among our institutions, universities, and so on. The second one is a lack of reward and recognition, what is also was mentioned before. So we need to have a very clear information about what kind of incentives researchers, PhD students, they can get from the RDM practices. What also was mentioned from more like an institutional level is lack of clarity about policies, rules, and responsibilities of data support professionals. It was very clear to see that some of the universities and institutions still don't have the research data policies. We have policies regarding open access to publications, but many of the universities, they are still don't have any rules and requirements according to research data. We also identified a few solutions. So first of all is professionalization of data stewardship and establishment of career tracks. So career track is a key. However, it needs to be adjusted to the institutional, national, or regional requirements. We also need to provide practical needs related RDM training for researchers. And we think that now it's the moment we should focus more on fair training, not only on open training, because we have a lot of materials and trainings about open science. However, in the practical way, what is fair and how to make your data fair is still under development. We also need to have clear solutions for monitor and recognize the various data support roles and responsibilities within different institutions. In many cases now, at the moment, one person or few persons, they do a lot of things. So they are in the same time, like they are working like a data stewards, data librarian, repository manager, and so on. So we really need to have this career track and clear responsibilities for all these people engaged with research data management practice. What kind of actions for RDA community? Of course, we would like to continue to map and cluster RDA groups to identify our similarities and to prevent the overlapping. Then we would like to also collect the regional RDM support and education case studies. It was mentioned before that the case studies is very, very useful for RDM practitioners. So we would like to more case studies from different parts of the world. And different, of course, different disciplines, research disciplines. And according to the presentation from Beth, we really need to increase the number of domain ambassadors. They really open doors. So we thought that collaboration projects from RDA and YOSC, it was a really, really good solution for support RDM activities.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of the webinar part of today. So I just want to take a moment to just say